And I do believe that we have rotten politics, and I'm not using that as an exaggeration.
Hey everyone and welcome. The EU will use any excuse to destroy their member nations, won't they? And have been shown to use any crisis to achieve that. We might only have part Brexit, but that part excludes us from the thirst for power the EU exudes. This time, they mask it behind fluffy words and calls for unity, essentially trying to persuade that the damage they're doing is a good thing and should be worshipped. So I thought I'd highlight the damage they are now trying to do on top of what they did over lurgy and lockdowns and IDs and mandates, etc, and green policy. The European Commission, if you didn't know, have presented plans for a lurgy cost of living crisis recovery fund. One even worse than the Franco-German proposal. Perhaps mindful of how underwhelming a presidency's been so far, as Ursula von der Leyen announced that the fund would total not 500 billion, as was suggested by Macron and Merkel in the Franco-German proposal, but 750 billion euros. Of course, this money won't feature in the 1.2 trillion already slated in the normal 7-year EU budget. You remember the black holes that they were having? Instead, the Commission will raise the extra dosh from the financial markets. The EU will effectively be borrowing as the EU and not as member states. Now, don't think this is a kindness, everyone. This is a loan. This isn't going to be given. This is a national debt that will be owned by the EU. See where this is going, anyone? In an appeal for European solidarity. Now, in my opinion, solidarity is a word they want to print on a boot that they will then use to eternally stamp on your faces, Europeans. The Spaniards and Italians, along with France and others, have argued that it would be impossible for them to pay all that money back themselves. That's the point. Keeps you in perpetual debt, doesn't it? And therefore, perpetual control. Instead, a sizable chunk would be distributed through grants that would ultimately be paid back by someone else. In other words, not them. In other words, you. That repayment period is set from 2028 to 2058. So it's not you per se. Well, it might not be you. It might still be you, but it's probably not going to be you. It's your children and their children and probably their children. So future generations can look forward to bearing the cost of today's misguided virus policies for many years to come, and also the green policy that's now put us in a position where we're having to struggle and ration all because of them for a continent already in the throes of a financial crisis. This, in my opinion, will only exacerbate an already dire debt situation across Europe. Or perhaps it's not. The Commission have actually claimed that they found an ingenious, or perhaps ingenuous, way of paying for all of this. For decades, Brussels has been trying to get its own resources, i.e. EU-levied taxes. So far, member states have rightly refused to give up this power, because obviously, you give up your taxes, you give up all sovereignty, correctly assuming that once the EU started levying taxes, what remained of sovereignty national governments still have would be even more curtailed. You wouldn't have a sovereign national government, you would have puppet head and figureheads for the EU. The pandemic, however, offered a fresh opportunity to challenge this scepticism. The Commission certainly seems to think so, given that it's proposed not one, but 4 new taxes to be raised centrally by Brussels. So they're already doing it. The emissions trading system would be expanded to generate, we're ready for this, 10 billion annually. Emissions trading system. In other words, punishing companies and punishing people for carbon emissions when they have the biggest carbon emissions on the planet. Tell me I'm wrong. Elites are all where all the carbon they are so worried about comes from. Do you think an average family that goes on holiday once a year and owns one car that can't use it very often because the petrol costs a fortune, or they've invested in EV and are being told that they can't use them anymore or charge them up? Look to California for that one. They've also proposed a carbon border tax, which would bring in anything from 5 billion to 14 billion a year. So not only are they going to make it too expensive for people like you and me to go abroad on holiday anymore, they're also going to tax the backside out of anyone that goes across a border. What happened to open border policy? What happened to all of that? It seems it goes to the wayside, doesn't it, when it's them that would lose because of it. Funny how that happens, isn't it? Not in my backyard. Even more disturbingly, we now see a new push for a Europe-wide digital tax, already introduced in some member states. The final new proposal, perhaps the most startlingly irrational, is for tax on companies that draw huge benefits from the single market, i.e. successful companies, thus thriving them off to cheaper nations, along with all of their jobs and skilled working. It's not a good idea, this, is it? It's just more actions that will crush us even more. But there is is a silver lining, everyone. It's not all doom and gloom. Nothing, apparently, has yet been decided. And the Frugal Four, which is the Netherlands, Australia, Denmark and Sweden, that have a slowly approach to things, have voiced some scepticism, so it can actually be blown out of the water. But if it's passed, the Recovery Fund would be almost diametrically opposed to what Europe actually needs, which is smaller government, fewer taxes, less regulations, more innovation, entrepreneurial endeavour and a more dynamic economy. None of those things are going to be done by these fraggles in power, in the EU or in WEF or in our individual nations leaders. They're all bought and paid for in regards to this. So it's a small hope, but there is a hope. Let's be honest, if they get this power of being able to dictate taxes, Europe's done. Europe is done. They will milk you dry while telling you that it's because of solidarity and unity and looking after you, therefore destroying your lives and your children's lives and possibly their children's lives, just for the image of looking good. Virtue is costing lives, and they're continuing with the virtue. Scum, every single one of them, in my honest opinion. Let me know what you think. If you're new to this channel, you know what to do. Please share it out, because YouTube don't like to. Stay sane. See you on the next one.